Okay, so quick heads up. This was recorded before Kai Car France got robbed last night. So yeah, before you guys started going to war in the comments, I do actually think Kai Car France won that fight, and I thought he won it clearly. There are going to be some examples of other fights that I thought were less clear than that, but yeah, I just want to put that out there before you guys go to war in the comments. So let's get in the video. MMA is the hardest sport to score, and it's not even close, man. Not only is MMA the hardest sport to score, it's also the sport where scoring is under the most scrutiny, to be honest, especially from the fans, man. So in today's video, we're going to talk about why MMA is such a hard sport to score, how the score can improve, and why I don't actually think the scoring will ever improve, and it's really not the judges' fault, man. So I'm pretty sure majority of you have been sitting there on a random Saturday night, and you got your beer, and you got your chips, and you got your wings, and you're like, I cannot wait to watch a fight, bro. Like, I do it every single Saturday. I'm in my room, ready to watch the fights, and as soon as the first scorecard comes up, a little buzzer goes off in your head and you go, this is about to be a long night, man. So we're gonna just be talking about MMA scoring today and why I think it's so hard and why I think judges get I'm not gonna say get a bad rap, but they get a lot of flack for stuff that they really cannot control, man. So first thing first, MMA scoring. How are MMA fights scored? If any of you guys have turned into an MMA broadcast at any point, specifically for the UFC, bro, you know they use a 10-point must system, which essentially means if a round is even, both competitors get 10 points. If one opponent wins a round soundly, they get a 10-9, which means one gets a 10, another one gets a 9. If one of the competitors overwhelmingly dominate a round, they get a 10-8. And if the fight should have been stopped, and this is one of the things I think a lot of people do not know, if judges can go and say, hey, this fight should have been stopped at this point, you actually can get a 10-7 round, which means one opponent gets a 10 and the other one gets a 7. So sounds self-explanatory. It is not, man. Inside of that 10-point must system, you have a couple of different things. You have 3 different ways majority of fights are scored. Number 1, and this is the overwhelming one, damage. How much damage an opponent inflicts on his other opponent. Number 2, effective striking and effective grappling. And number 3, effective aggression, which we're going to talk about when we get there, man. So I want to break down every single one of those points and explain why it's so hard for judges to score those points and why, especially once you factor everything in, it gets tough, man. So number 1, damage. And this is the one I so routinely hear spouted out whenever there's a close decision or there's a controversial decision. Oh, this guy had more damage than this guy. How do you quantify damage? Now, there's 2 major ways you guys can quantify damage. 1 is physical damage. This is cuts, this is bruises, this is limps, this is visible damage that you actually can see on somebody. 2 is power punches. And this is the one where I think a lot of MMA fans do not get right, and it's not their fault. I think it has a lot to do with how the UFC fights, but how the UFC presents its fights, particularly with their significant strike stats, man. If you've ever watched a UFC broadcast, and I say this a lot, if somebody lands 200 significant strikes on you, you will be unconscious. Like, I don't know how to explain that to a normal person, but yeah, so a lot of times, and I said, a lot of the stats that the UFC puts out are hyperinflated in order to make them look more ridiculous, man. So that leads to a lot of confusion with how fights are scored. Judges see fights differently than the broadcast is putting them out, right? So perfect example of this, if you land a jab by the UFC, a lot of times is considered a significant strike, bro. But to a judge, they may not be a significant strike. And then on the damage side of things, man, how do you quantify that? Again, bruises, cuts, strapes. Again, that seems like it's fairly simple, but from a judge's point of view, a lot of times during these fights, you can't tell who got cut where. You can't tell who's cut up. You can't tell what strike led to a cut. You know how many headbutts we see in the UFC that lead to cuts? But again, the judges don't know that, man. So their job is very, very hard when it comes to that. And I'm actually going to give you guys an example for all of these. For damage, any of you guys who've seen the Jalen Turner and Mateus Gamrot fight, a lot of you people said that Jalen Turner won that fight, which I watched that fight on mute and I thought Gamrot won it. But specifically, a lot of people said he won that fight because of damage, man, because he was landing the more damaging punches. So perfect example, if I landed the more damaging punches during a round, but I'm also getting 3 minutes of control time put on me, did I really win that round, man? Again, that's how the judges have to look at it. Yeah, and then also with that fight, a lot of times when Turner was knocking Gamrot down, they looked like Gamrot was going for takedown. So from a judge's point of view, that looks very, very bad. So that's why judging is such a hard thing. So that's the first criteria, damage. The second criteria, of course, effective striking and effective grappling. Now again, how do you quantify effective striking and effective grappling, man? For me, effective striking is who lands the cleaner shots and also who lands the more consistent shots. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people get wrong when it comes to MMA striking, man. There's so many fights where a dude will win a round just because he's putting more output out there, which it shouldn't be like that. But again, people get confused with that where they go, well, that's effective striking. No, if you're landing 25% of your strikes, but you're landing more than me because you're throwing more than me, that doesn't mean you're more effective with the strikes that you have. Also, how do you quantify effective strikes? Do you quantify leg kicks and head kicks the same way? Do you quantify hooks and uppercuts the same way? Do you quantify jabs and say knees the same way? Are these all scored as the same effective strike? And you can say the same thing when it comes to effective grappling, right? Effective grappling, is a takedown the same as getting somebody on the cage and dragging them to the mat for 30 seconds? Is a takedown for 30 seconds at the end of a round valuable if the round was close? Is it valuable if the round wasn't close? Is it valuable if it just like, there's so many things where you have to look at this from a judging point of view, and they have to take all of this into fact. You have to take in fact with the damage. Okay, if somebody gets 3 minutes of takedown control, but they get a cut off of their back, like Tony Ferguson was routinely known for doing, was slicing dudes off his back, do you give that round to the dude who got the takedown but was also getting damaged off of bottom, man? So there's so many little things with that when it comes to effective striking and effective grappling, man. And again, specifically in the UFC with how they boost up their stats, a lot of times we've seen stats where somebody like Merab Dvalishvili would get 50 takedown attempts and only get 10 of them, but since he shot 50 takedowns, his opponent really can't effectively strike, man. So a judge has to look at all of that. And then the last one is effective aggression. Now this is more simpler, and this is a lot of times can be easier to see from a fan's point of view, man. Effective aggression is simple. Who is leading the fight? Who's the first one to go? Who's landing who's landing the first strikes? Who's getting the more aggressive strikes? Who is the one leading the dance? And again, a lot of times in the UFC, we see fights where a guy will be coming forward, but he also will be getting pieced up. But because of the fact that the fight might be close and it looks like he's coming forward, he looks like he's winning that round, man. So that one, again, we really don't see that one come into effect a lot, but the first two are really, really difficult. Now, I'm going to give you guys a perfect example of a fight where I thought one guy won. And again, there's multiple fights. For me, Arman Tsarukyan versus Mateusz Gamrot is one I thought Arman won clearly, and the judges saw it a different way. And then when I went online, the same majority of people thought Arman won. But once I watched that fight back, I saw how they gave it to Gamrot, even though I still believe even though I still believe Arman Tsarukyan won. But I'm going to talk about Petr Yan versus Sean Strickland. So this is a perfect fight that shows all the examples of what I'm talking about, man. This was a fight that was very, very close the first two rounds, and a lot of people said that Sean won but off of damage. Well, yes, Sean O'Malley landed the most damaging strike of the fight, which was, of course, I believe it was an elbow that ended up cutting Petr Yan open. But before that, Petr Yan was landing the most damaging strikes that weren't doing cuts. And this is why it's so hard for a judge to score that, because again, by the end of the fight, Petr Yan's face looks like a buzzsaw, but it mostly comes from one strike, whereas before that, they both were landing power punches, don't get me wrong, but it was clearly Petr Yan's punches that were doing the more significant damage. And then, of course, at the end of the first round is a very, very close round. Again, the UFC stats are weird, but I think Sean O'Malley won that round by a couple of different strikes. But Petr Yan gets a takedown at the end of that round, even though he does no damage. How do you score that takedown without the damage? Because the round was close. And if anybody has ever taken one MMA class or had an MMA fight, one of the most prominent things that you are told consistently is end the round on top, end the round on top, end the round on top, particularly if it's a close round. So that's a very, very hard fight to score because it factors in all these things. Effective striking, both of them were effectively striking. How do you compare both of those? Damage. Again, Sean O'Malley had the most damaging strike of that fight, but Petr Yan before then was landing the more damaging punches, even though it was close, man. So how do you factor that in when you come to the scoring? And then aggression, they both were coming forward, they both were fighting, so you really can't factor in aggression with that. And then grappling, Petr Yan clearly won, man. So I'm not going to say who I thought won that fight because I don't want to hear war in the comments, but you get how difficult it can be for judges to score fights. And this is just one example. There's so many examples I can pull up. Recently, Chris Curtis versus Kevin Gastelum, man. That fight was ultimately seems like it was decided on the head, but an accidental headbutt that Chris Curtis went down from, but the judges, again, they don't know that, man. So yeah, MMA judging is hard. Give judges a break a little bit. I'm going to be trying to post it on Saturday so you guys can actually see this before the fights, man. But yeah, give judges a break a little bit, man. MMA scoring is very, very hard and it's very, very difficult. And people really have to factor in all of these things. And when you get a fight where like the Islam versus Volkanovski fight, where literally all of these things are true, like are happening at the same time. Islam and Volk are both effectively striking. They're both knocking each other down. Also with the damage thing, how do you count knockdowns? Knockdowns in boxing are automatic 10-8 round, where in MMA they're not. They are, you can still win a round even if you get knocked down, man. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on MMA scoring, man. Again, I just wanted to talk about scoring a little bit. I think refs get a very, very bad rep, man. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Appreciate y'all for watching, man. My boys.